far as cedar trees go, everything I know about cedar trees I learned from my teacher, Cynthia Updegrave, who's here tonight. So thank you, Cynthia, for teaching me all about cedar trees and for being here. So as far as stabbing goes, as well, none of you are going to get stabbed tonight, but somebody else might on the page. I really, really appreciate having the opportunity to share my work with all of you. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. Thank you so much to Hugo House for having us here. Thank you to Hugo House for having the Made at Hugo House program again. It really, really made a huge difference for me for the past year. When I started working on this book, Starvation Mode, I knew it was going to be about illness and wellness and ancestry. I knew that bad food was going to be a catalyst. I kept talking about top ramen. I've eaten a lot of top ramen. And I knew that traditional indigenous food and medicine was going to be a way out in this book. In my first book, My Body is a Book of Rules, I chose not to focus on a lot of the minor illnesses I've had throughout my life. Gallbladder disease, gut distress, hormone imbalance, some of the lady problems I've experienced that I'm not allowed to talk about in polite company, but I get to talk about on the page, one of the benefits of being a writer. But I began to realize that my problems probably had a lot to do with all that top ramen I was eating, and my reactions to food were likely genetic. I have celiac disease, I have lactose and casein intolerance, and I found out my genes likely reveal really interesting things that are in my ancestry. Once I looked into my ancestry, I began seeing trauma in many places. In colonized North America, in Ireland's Great Famine, in the experiments with civil liberties in Galicia before my ancestors left, and in the hard lives of the coal miners in Pennsylvania's Schuylkill County. So for a long time I worked on this project as though it would be a narrative of fixing this broken thing, that thing being myself, and of uncovering this ancestral past and the science of all of that, of this uncoding of my DNA. I completely had blinders on. I was working to try to fit this story into a narrative trajectory that I had created. And I was ignoring the fact that this book, really at its core, I think, maybe I'll be wrong in a year, which is fine. I think that this is a book about the pursuit of pleasure and the distance between wanting and loving or liking. And I think it's about the resonance of ancestral experiences that might have conditioned my body to malfunction in this world. So in recent months, this book has become a lot more complicated, and I absolutely love that. I am so relieved that this book is so complicated now. It's still about traditional food, and it's still about the imposition of nutrient-poor modern stand-ins for those foods. And it's still about my lady problems and my gut distress. But I'm also allowing myself to wander. So the excerpt you're about to hear is a result of that wandering. Ostensibly, it has nothing to do with traditional food, but it's very much a piece of the story about how I failed to develop my own sense of self-control. This was the point in my life where I started stuffing my sorrows into empty Texas toast boxes. So again, I really appreciate what's happened over the past year. Made at Hugo House really forced me to take this project seriously and stick with it even when the writing really, really frustrated me. Sometimes it absolutely would have been hard to stick with it without the support of the program, my amazing cohort, Brian McGuigan, my wonderful classmates, and my writer friends, my writing group, and my wonderful teacher, Peter Mountford. I'm also so grateful for the support of For Culture and Potlatch Fund in supporting this project, Starvation Month. I have to make sure my boyfriend Steve knows my whereabouts at all times. We don't live together, but we keep up communication over an online instant messenger throughout the day. If I take too long getting home on the bus, I have a small panic attack, hoping that if he checks the time and wonders where I am, he'll guess that I stopped at the grocery store. I fret over each of his text messages that I've neglected to answer when I haven't kept my phone close, fearing his suspicion. I bolt out of bed after oversleeping. I text him if I'll be later than expected in returning to my empty home and booting up my PC. If Steve really were so jealous and suspicious, I could escape. But he's not stalking my moves. The tyranny exists entirely in my mind, and its power has been growing for more than 10 years. I told Steve about the panic attacks. Really? He said. You know I'm just watching Jon Stewart most of the time when you're on your way home, right? He and I are in constant digital contact only because we're tethered to our computers for most of our waking hours, and because we really like talking to each other. He told me, sometimes I notice how long you're gone, but I don't get mad, I get worried. I get it from my mom. In the days following our conversation, I took unannounced neighborhood strolls and dawdled over my grocery list. Weeks later, when a bus delay had me pacing and checking my phone every minute, I told Steve I was still knotted up over nothing. And then I told him it wasn't exactly nothing. I said, I need to tell you about Kyle. I met Kyle when I was 16. I had spent my school years dodging basketballs aimed at my head and mutterings of freak coming at me from bodies sidled up to lockers. After 8th grade, I transformed. I ditched my jeans and t-shirts, lined my eyes with black, donned a necklace of spikes, and wore shockingly short dresses in retina-cramping color combinations. My favorite reflective dress got me booed at an outdoor pep rally. At 16, I was friendless and lusty, stuffed with the built-up longing of an adolescent spent kissing pictures of much older men with marginally successful musical careers. When I met Kyle, he wasn't a close fit like my favorite silver vinyl dress, but he liked me. He was a friend of a grade school friend, 18 years old and college-bound. We spent the first few summer months of our relationship swimming in the lake by my parents' house and watching late-night TV. We took photos of ourselves with my digital camera, smiling, sprawling on the floor, pressed together, posing for each other. My best friends had dropped out or drifted away at the beginning of high school, and my past 2 years had been full of books and chat rooms. I was so starved for affection that I binged on his bottomless love as though it were a Costco bag of pizza bagel bites. Kyle and I talked online and on the phone constantly, unable to let ourselves verbally separate. When he left for college, 2 hours away, we made each other cards, Microsoft Paint love notes, and construction paper flowers. Lovey, I wrote, I love you. You are the best Lovey ever. Inside every card, he told me, Lovey, you are my everything, my reason for being alive. He used his scholarship to buy me gifts. Clothes, flowers, a lava lamp, a Palm Pilot. He would be angry if I would discard the flowers before he replaced them, even after they wilted and shriveled to brittle wads of brown. I had to instruct my mom not to touch them. My room stank of rotting roses. Kyle didn't care much for college. He had chosen computer science as his major, but he had general education requirements to get out of the way. He didn't want to live in his cinder block cubby of a dorm, too far from me, even though I spent all my free time chatting with him online and agreed to update him on my every absence from the house. So, at the beginning of my senior year, he left college. He remained enrolled, but he took an apartment across the lake from my parents' house, closing the distance between us to 1.5 miles. Kyle's one-bedroom apartment had retro wood wall paneling and a grown-up view of the lake that put the campus out of his mind. He stopped going to class. He wasn't working. His full-time fixation was his devotion to me. For me, the fun of dating had worn off after a few months. Kyle modeled his limp desperation into an act that fooled me into believing that if I didn't do as he said, choose him over my family every evening and weekend, plan my future around him, I would be killing him. I wanted to be humane. It was hard to see that I could just walk away when I didn't have even one girlfriend to throw a stack of 17 magazines at my head. While Kyle sought to envelop me in an affection bubble lined with stuffed animals, roses, and Nintendo games, I began setting my sights on college, even thinking about grad school. I was becoming a more serious poet than ever, compiling a chapbook of my work. I planned out my path to the poet laureateship, but I did not envision a future with Kyle. After an abysmal semester as a commuter, Kyle dropped out. He spent his days creating a computer program that was a copy of another game. It never sold because it was overpriced and full of bugs. When his money ran out, he moved back into his parents' house and grudgingly took a job at a chain pharmacy. But mostly, I paid for our frequent dinner dates with my earnings from a job as a library lackey. That spring, Kyle lost his car and his license. He had been driving without insurance or registration. His car was impounded and he couldn't afford to retrieve it. He convinced me to put up the cash for his court payments when he couldn't. Nearly every day, I would drive the half hour to his house, pick him up, and bring him to my house to hang out. At the end of the evening, I would take him home. I only saw the inside of his house once. During those evening drives home, finally alone, my heart settled inside its cage. Even during raw, early spring nights, I rolled down my window, a habit I'm still unable to shake. And while my lungs expanded, I slid a CD into the stereo and turned up the volume. I was serious about music, but Kyle had never really liked it. My CDs, organized by the season during which I craved them, became my single point of relationship resistance. But Kyle couldn't let me have my own love. And soon enough, he rescinded all his Pearl Jam insults and made me a mix CD of his top 20 Pearl Jam songs. On the way to Kyle's house, I allowed him to creep into the locket in my brain where my love for my favorite band lived. I didn't want to share. Being a teenage girl, I had territorial tastes they began to gravitate elsewhere as soon as he sidled up to what I claimed. Kyle didn't really like swear words, never drank or drugged, and thought rappers were imbecilic. So as soon as he was out of the car and in the house, I put on one of two CDs, 9 Inch Nails' The Downward Spiral, or Eminem's The Eminem Show. Driving past soybean fields, boxy developments, and the desolate county fairgrounds, I'd spit the lyrics I came to know by heart. Little hellions, kids feeling rebellious, embarrassed their parents still listen to Elvis. They start feeling like prisoners helpless, till someone comes along on a mission and yells, "Bitch!" I began thinking of other boys. I liked 2 best friends and spent most of my time at school with them. The night of prom, I journeyed to the next town over to watch TV with the boys. A few days later, Kyle made me a carrot cake. I shredded carrots for 2 hours, he told me. That's how much I love you. No one else will ever love you this much. Our love became increasingly platonic as time passed. We had always hovered around first and second base, but fumbled when trying to go all the way. In photos, my smiles began to look forced. From time to time, he would take my photo from behind while I slept. I could tell that 2 years into the relationship, my parents were ready for me to ditch this guy. They never voiced their disapproval. My grades were excellent. I had never done drugs. I wasn't pregnant. They respected my choices and my autonomy. They probably figured, as I did, that I would go to college and naturally drift away from Kyle. I couldn't tell them my heart was withering because I didn't realize this transformation wasn't part of growing up and pairing off. I had banished my striped skirts and platform shoes to the attic, trading them in for a daily double layer of flannel shirts and a rotation of roomy jeans to hide the 5 pounds of brand new belly fat on my twiggy frame. I was hooked on the drug of Chinese takeout, went apeshit when our place discontinued the deep-fried sweet potato, because for 1 minute, that sugar would burn through every mote of darkness in my thick head. When I chose the University of Maryland, 4 hours from home, I secretly looked forward to the wedge it would drive between Kyle and me. I never expected that he would follow me. Kyle found a Maryland apartment immediately. He was surprised to be asked for a security deposit and the final month's rent. He asked me to get out my checkbook, my account being flush with graduation money. I had never stood up to another person in the entirety of my short life, certainly not the boyfriend who interrupted me and mocked my correct pronunciation of the word query or the word experiment and the name Cohen, until I believed I hadn't earned the right to speak. Every time I opened that checkbook, I was afraid to see the carbon reminder of the largest sum that had ever left my account. The apartment was only a few miles away from me, but without cars we relied on public transit. From campus, bus to rail to bus was an easy but long trip that Kyle would never allow me to make alone. He scolded me when I headed from my dorm to the dining hall after dark, worrying that I would be raped and murdered outside my dorm. Telling him I was studying in the lounge, I would wander around campus after dark for hours. After class one day, I slipped into the University Health Center for the optional but strongly recommended meningitis vaccine Kyle had forbidden me to get before leaving New Jersey. He told me, "Vaccines are dangerous. My lovey is too precious for it to be worth the risk." Kyle visited me often, helping me drain my meal plan before the end of the school year. I spent the end of finals week studying the vending machine for the single snack that would best get me through the day. He insisted on accompanying me to my favorite class, an American history lecture, then mocked it. Kyle took odd web design jobs, but still needed loans for my dwindling savings. I focused on memorizing my anthropology notes and on my burning crush for my history TA. I thought about breaking up with Kyle. I thought about going after the cute boy in my history class who baked me banana bread, the one who wanted to be my study buddy, or the one who taught me how to play Dance Dance Revolution. But Kyle had quit college, quit work, quit his family, and moved twice to follow me. He shredded carrots for 2 hours. But now, only he was tracking those points. By Christmas of my sophomore year, I had spent a lot of time on my secret walks thinking about how I would end the relationship. When I told Kyle we were over, he said, "Just give me a 2-month extension." I gave him a few more weeks before I cut him loose. After bringing my car to campus, I would drive around alone at night, zooming around the streets of DC. I never stopped meandering around campus at night, sometimes curling into a ball on the lawn, an unidentified body. Kyle paid back what he owed me. He sent me e-cards through my first year of graduate school in Seattle, 3 years after our breakup. My responses to his IMs were terse. I always had to go. Nearly a decade after I banished Kyle as my warden, I have never spent a relationship minute without the sensation that I am being fretted over, with accusations waiting. I rush home, log on, and tell Steve in detail where I have been. "Cool," he says. "Did you have fun?" When he makes me shepherd's pie, my favorite, he chops up the carrots in under a minute. It's been years since I've heard from Kyle. I can't look him up and feel his lonesome sorrow sit in my belly like rancid meat. If I could ice pick the fear out of my brain, I would have accomplished it already with a wash of whiskey or my daily bludgeoning of mood pills. All I can do is remind myself dozens of times every day that I am free. Steve told me that the legs of circus elephants are sometimes chained to stakes, and even after the chains are removed, the elephants remain frozen, imagining that they are still chained. I think my whole body is bound. My head is ready to burst. Late at night, I walk to the neighborhood playground and swing, high and wild. I want to swing so high, the phantom chain will snap, hurling me into a place where no one can find me.